Many landlords think that a property manager's job is simply to collect the rent and coordinate repairs. That actually is not the most important thing that we do. If you've ever felt like you're always waiting for that next shoe to drop, be it a tenant issue, getting that phone call that your contractor is delayed, or worse yet, a violation notice from a city agency, you're not alone. Some of these things are enough to get you to second guess, why would I even want to be a buy and hold rental property investor at all? So in today's video, we're going to cover what a professional property manager can do to help you manage the 4 major types of risks that you need to get a plan around if you want to protect your income and your sanity. And of course, we're going to talk about it from the perspective of a Philadelphia and suburban Delaware County landlord. So let's get started. I'm Veronica Woods, and welcome back to the Real Estate Wisdom channel, where we share tips and market updates to help you grow and scale a profitable rental property portfolio here in Philadelphia and suburban Delaware County. I come from the perspective not just as an investor, but a professional property manager and real estate broker who is proudly part of the A team for a lot of my clients who are on their way to becoming rental property moguls. So this is the 4th video of the series about growing your rental property portfolio without self-managing. So far, we've covered the mindset. We talked about income leaks. We also talked about the rookie process mistakes even seasoned investors slip back into for the sake of time. In this video, we're going to give you an inside peek in some of the strategy sessions where we're coaching our clients how to manage very real financial risk. And we've broken it down into 4 main risks that you need to be concerned about if you are a rental property investor. And again, I'm joined by fellow real estate advisor on my team, Samira Kiett. When we sit down with a prospective property management client in the rental income strategy session, I always show the slide that outlines the 4 major risks of managing a rental property portfolio. Inevitably, people pick 1 or 2 of those risks as their major pain points, and we kind of coach them through what could potentially be done to increase their cash flow or decrease their headaches, more likely as well. And so we thought that for this video, we just kind of walk you through how the conversation goes with the 4 different types of risks that we see. So in no particular order, we're going to go through risk by risk, and we're going to start off with tenant risk. And Samira, if you can kick off an example of a discussion with a client about tenant risk.
Everyone. So one of the risks that we look at or that we tend to have conversations about or when it comes to tenant risk. And when we say tenant risk, think of it as, what are you expecting from your tenant as a landlord? Just kind of talking or use an example of one of the conversations we had most recently with a potential client. We asked them, like, what are some of your worries of, tenants moving into your property? And it can be things of, not taking care of the property, up to your standards, just kind of letting it go to waste, not communicating properly, maybe lapse on rent, there's a pattern, that there is when it comes to not paying rent on time, like, those areas of concern. And through our conversation, we realized, although these were areas that he was trying to avoid because of the target audience that he attracted with his properties, he wound up really falling into those areas that he was trying to avoid. Meaning that in this case, for example, he just went and Section 8 is great. I understand it's guaranteed money, and the people do present themselves at times as very reliable people. However, the notion that a lot of landlords forget is that they still need to do a screening process. Even on Section 8, I would just keep the process that we've discussed in previous videos across the board for anybody. only because, unfortunately for this client that I'm referring to, it came down to it that although the rent, was being paid portion by the city, state, county, or government, their portions were still maybe not consistent because not all the time is Section 8 completely 100% covered. Also, when we did an inspection of the property, unfortunately, the property wasn't up to the standards of what you would want your tenant and how you would want them to treat your home. And even just the idea of possible animals, the communication isn't the best, or a lot of areas. And that's why we always go back to say that screening process is very important, especially when you want to avoid those tenant risk and concerns that you have as a private landlord.
Yeah, no, you touched on a lot of good points. The only thing I'll add is it's important if you are going to target Section 8 tenants is to understand the Section 8 process. So that process doesn't involve screening. So just because you want to target Section 8 with your rentals doesn't mean that you skip steps in your screening process, because the housing authorities really put that on you. And also kind of understand what the lease restrictions are when you have Section 8. So, for example, there was another potential client didn't realize that they were locked into these 2-year leases, and that if there was a problem, they needed to time when they would make decisions about not renewing so that they could have the chance to move them out and get a good tenant or a better tenant at the right time. So that goes into kind of understanding what the requirements may be on you as the landlord for tenants and choosing Section 8, for example.
And one other thing I would like to add when it comes to tenant risk, even if you're utilizing a realtor like myself, I always recommend too to have your own screening process. A lot of times,
Mm.
listing agents and realtors will do the basic screening of what we agreed on, you know, minimum credit score, income, no evictions. We check for that. But when it comes to working with someone, or it comes to building that relationship and communication, or really getting to know someone, I do recommend that you have your own screening process as well to avoid these tenant risks that we've highlighted in this conversation.
Oh, that's a great point, because even if you think you're doing the right thing with um, outsourcing part of the showing process and that part of leasing with a professional real estate person, they may not want the liability of actually making that selection. So we also had folks during this strategy session kind of blaming, like, oh, the realtor gave me a bad person and I didn't know any better. And then the question was, well, what criteria did you give them? And did you make some sort of judgment call at the end that maybe sacrifice some of your original criteria because you wanted to get somebody in there? So yeah, that is a really good point about being clear on what your criteria is, even if you're outsourcing part of that responsibility of finding the tenant to someone else. Okay. So we should go on to the second risk, which is compliance risk. So this gets into the licenses and the legal issues. So why don't you paint the picture of when clients come to us, or potential clients come to us worried about compliance issues?
Yeah, so I can say, out of all the risks, this is probably one of the most popular ones. A lot of times when it comes to private landlords, or landlords that kind of had their rhythm or haven't had to renew, at least, within so many years of having the same tenant, they tend to lose track of what is required of the landlord in Philadelphia or any of the other surrounding counties. Each county is different. So, depending on your county, you definitely want to stay on top of what is required, what is needed, what information you need to share with the tenant, and then what information you need to gather from the tenant. This is very important because, God forbid, we do have, a bad tenant that we're trying to get out, and, you got to go to court. If you don't have the basic like documents lined up and ready, presented, or even passed off to the tenant, that can put you at a huge risk in a very vulnerable spot as a landlord. One of the most recent conversations we've had with a client of ours is, at the time they believe that they was in compliance, which is fair. Um, The only thing with compliance, and this one here, I'm just going to focus on Philadelphia a little bit because every year there's a new rule or new policy coming in. And for the date of maybe a lease that took place in 2022, now in 2025, those rules have changed. Just little things of like the lead inspection, making sure we're getting that done and issued off to the tenant at an appropriate time and appropriate deadline. Because without that, you can't renew your rental license. Having a rental license is very important. I know there is a lot of private landlords that kind of skate under the radar, and if you can get away with that, congratulations, but I don't recommend it on any level. It is very important to get that rental license. And just little things of passing out the required addendums. Like, did you know the Philadelphia bedbug addendum is a requirement that you must give to your tenants? And you'll be surprised how many clients we've taken on, had conversations with, or just kind of have one-off conversations, and they find out that they're not in compliance like they thought they were.
Yeah, I mean, I think everything is getting more complex, and so that's why we're finding more owners coming to us worried about compliance risk, especially if you actually have properties in multiple municipalities. Because as Samira mentioned, the rules are different for each county or each town. So it's not even, you can't even say Delaware County is one way, Philadelphia is the other. So each specific municipality in Delaware County has their own set of rules. And if you have properties across the different township lines, then you have to keep track of them all. So one of the things that, we advise them to do is just take a quick inventory of where you stand with all your documents. Are you deficient in any area? And then even if it's for a good tenant, that you have a great relationship with, immediately, we're coaching, immediately try to catch up those documents. And particularly with the leases, a lot of owners think that they're making their life easier by just letting the leases roll over month to month, year after year. But think about it. If you could potentially raise the rent 3% each year, how much money you're leaving on the table by avoiding having a conversation or having the tenant sign off on another piece of paper. But it's something simple, but that's like really like a home run win for us, where we tell someone like, hey, we can help you, increase your income just by having a lease renewal process in place.
Yeah, and I guess just to piggyback off of that really quickly, keep in mind too, like even when you say avoid those conversations, let the lease lapse, there's different compliances, believe it or not, for an annual lease versus a month-to-month lease. There's different communications that you have to send out to the tenant, on a monthly basis, 6 months versus just a 1 year locked in. So just some things to keep in mind. Like, although you're avoiding the work in that moment, without having that annual lease renewal process, before you know it, 3 years has passed, and now you're out of compliance because you haven't kept up with proper communication, documentation, et cetera, et cetera.
No, that's a good point to add. So compliance risk is real, and as I alluded to, it seems to be a growing concern for many owners. So I will segue to the third risk that we hear about: property risk. And this is maintenance and dealing with contractors. So this probably is one of the most common risks that we see, especially from newer investors. They worry about, are they going to have the right eyes on the property? Are they paying the right amount for individual work? And are they, getting the right ROI over their overall investment? Because obviously, they're trying to have their money coming in be less than the money they're spending over time, so they can actually get their money paid back and more for their investment. And so I can think of initial meeting with a client where they were managing a few properties from out of state. And so they were self-managing from out of state, I guess, to put it simply. And they got to the point where for one of the properties, they were dealing with multiple violations from the city L&I office. And so they were trying to coordinate an electrician, an HVAC person. They had appliance issues. There were pest control issues. And they were like, just help me. Like, I can't navigate to get out of hot water with the township. And we talked to them about, part of the gap and challenge what they probably were dealing with is not having a central point of contact to really ensure all the contractors were talking to each other. Now they talked to the people individually, but really cross-referencing what one person was saying to the other, as well as having their own eyes on the property, somebody reliable that they could rely on, dependable, to give them a accurate observation of what's really going on. And so that's something, that we put together in our stabilization plan. The first thing, we would need to do is just get our arms around, like, what's really going on in the property? What's the worst problem, and what problem is impacting another? It turned out the pest problem was kind of a obstacle for a lot of the other contractors to do their job. So we kind of reprioritized, let's get rid of the pest problem so the other vendors felt more comfortable with doing their job. So again, it's kind of like just putting together a game plan to tackle maintenance, be it immediately or there's things that you can delay, but really having a better understanding of what their options were. And they really appreciated that we could kind of stage that work for their property to get it back in order.
Yeah, and I guess just to kind of co-star off of that story that was just, or example that was just shared, I definitely recommend, even if you're out of state, you definitely want eyes on the property. I even find, just kind of throughout my property management experience here, that even pictures don't always give you the full story. So just relying on pictures by itself, just relying on the word of the mouth of the contractor isn't always the best avenue to go. There's been multiple times where a contractor has said to me, and those who maybe not own a property but have a home or get work done can relate. They come to you and say, yep, it's done. It looks great. We love it. And then you go look at it and you're like, this doesn't look good at all. Or, this isn't going to suffice for what I'm looking for, and things like that. Keep that in mind as well as a landlord. Like, the contractors are going to tell you, yeah, they done the basic work, but then again, is it really completed? Does it really resolve the problem? Is it even up to your standards or the standards of what you're expecting your tenants to have? So it's very important for property risk to have a team on your side, especially if you're an out-of-state investor. Now, if you're in state and get to the property quickly, it is important you put eyes on the property as the project develops throughout the different stages. But at the end of the day, pictures, you cannot just rely on pictures and word of mouth. There has to be eyes on the property as well, because maybe there's a bigger picture that the little camera didn't catch at the time.
That's a good point. One other last thing I just thought of when you were talking is sometimes no news is not good news. And I know I reflected on this in other videos, but sometimes tenants don't want to bother you, or they don't want to be accused of possible damage. So they kind of, maybe they're thinking about ways they can fix it themselves. But there's one thing, you can do to minimize your risk is just to have regular inspections. And it's hard to kind of inspect tenant occupied properties every month or even every quarter per se. But we try to recommend that, you use contractors that can give you eyes on the property. Just last week we were asking about the contractor, like, did you see a second cat there? Because the tenant swore the pet was, visiting, quote unquote. And then he readily said, oh yeah, that second cat was there every time I was there. So having, coordination with, every time that there's a need to visit a property, really assessing, the condition, is really valuable to kind of protecting your financial interests. So when I speak of financial interest, so going to segue into the last risk, where I call just financial planning risk. And generally, people think about it in terms of, it having to make capital investments in the property. And they worry about, am I going to get a bill that I can't manage to pay for? Did I buy a money pit? And how that multiplies if I have multiple properties. There's people who may inherit a property or buy a property that needs a lot of work. They get the property, let's say they buy it at a cheap price, but then they're worried about, well, can I afford to even renovate it enough to make it income producing? So one client that came to us inherited a few properties. Properties were in different levels of um, needing repair, from full renovation to minor cosmetic repairs, but it was at like 50% vacancy. So she wanted to hold on to these properties to really generate income. So the properties came from her mom. And so she wanted to generate that income to pay for her mother's nursing home expenses. So it was important to not just have the property sit there, but she was so overwhelmed with, like, I have, these 4 properties, 12 units. I don't know what to do first. I definitely don't have enough money to just blanket and do everything at once. And when she came to us, we kind of just put together a plan of, all right, let's evaluate unit by unit, what would be the rough cost to renovate each one. And then which properties would most likely have the highest value rent. And we just created a plan just based on tackling the ones that potentially have the highest ROI. And let's say, some had no mortgages. Let's tackle those first, renovate, get them on the market, and go to the next ones. Because sometimes contractors, back to the property or contractor risk, may tell you, let's do everything at once because it's easier, because they make more money, right?
Of
But
course.
may not be the best for you from a cash flow perspective. So having a sounding board just to figure out what is the correct order. There's no correct, but the best way to maximize or stretch your dollar, and at the same time get more properties income producing quicker. And so that's the thing that we talk about with just kind of managing the risk of your overall financial portfolio.
Yeah, and I mean, and even maybe not a portfolio that big, just want to give another smaller example. We had a client as well that, bought a duplex that, obviously needed some upgrades and had tenants inside. We helped him create a plan that would help him kind of not only raise the rent because they were below rent market at that time, but also renovate the place. And it wasn't, oh, move out the tenants, do both at the same time, and then lease them back up. We a first half of the year took on one property, took the process of, moving a tenant out, getting the work done, leasing that property up, and then getting above rental rate based off of the plan that we had for renovations. And then we followed the same plan for the second floor as well. So it doesn't have to be you just think about the financial risk when you have multiple properties. It can even be if you invest in a multi-unit property and just kind of being strategic on how you want to go through each part of the building and really do those renovations so that your rent can one attract the tenants you're looking for, and possible, obviously go over the rental market of what is being probably collected at that time, most likely.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we could help based a plan on your financial resources. So we've had some owners, when they purchase a property, maybe they have a renovation loan. And so the cost of the rehab is built in the loan, for cheaper debt than if they, did it on their credit card per se. And then in that case, it might make sense to renovate both units at once. But if you're funding it another way, and maybe want to minimize your cash outflow from your earning interest in another account, then it might make sense to, do one unit at a time. And there's nothing wrong with that. And all the while, make the trade off with being having tenants in that are currently paying rent, because that's another dynamic of the case that you were talking about. We helped them think through, like, there's two tenants that are currently paying rent, albeit below market. Which one made sense to terminate their lease and take a short-term reduction in cash flow for the upside of on the other side of renovations, being able to charge a higher rent. As you can see from these stories, hiring a professional property manager is more than just getting a middle person between you and the tenants. It's about forming a partnership or getting someone to be a true partner to help you actively manage risk. And it could be preventative, such as stopping bad tenant placements or having a real stabilization plan to map out how you're going to get your target ROI for your investment. Or it could be more tactically dealing with problems day to day of just really figuring out what's really going on with your properties. And if you heard enough to kind of say, like, hey, maybe I do want a second look at what's going on with my properties, feel free to check out the link below the video to schedule your own rental income strategy session. And if you want more insight on how a good partnership really works and what it looks like between you and a professional property manager, and how they can help you really earn more cash flow and have a more smooth rental property business, emphasize business, you'll want to stay tuned and watch the video that's appearing on the screen now. And as always, thanks for watching. Happy investing.